Welcome to a record written in pencil on thin-lined paper that still bears the grease of the machines. December 8, 1941. The sirens sounded before dawn, but the presses did not stop. The foreman said the shift would go on no matter what happened overseas. We were to keep the belts running until further notice. The handwriting belongs to Margaret L. Green, 26 years old press operator at Willow Run Assembly, Detroit. The morning after Pearl Harbor, she noted what she saw, not what she felt. The smell of grease is the same. The radio keeps repeating the president's address. I cannot see the war, but they say it begins here. Outside the factory, snow covered the roofs of the River Rouge and Packard plants. Inside, the heat rose from the stamping presses, mixing with the hiss of steam. Telegrams from Washington arrived before sunrise, terse, unsigned, urgent transition to war output immediately. By noon, the first tool dies were replaced. Refrigerators gave way to fuselage frames, and automobile lines became bomber lines. Workers came in silence, some in aprons, some in coats, still damp with snow. The only sound was metal striking metal. We worked through the night. Another entry reads, "The men have gone. The women remain. The belts will not stop." From these fragments, factory logs, shift reports, letters home, the pattern forms itself. No uniforms, no rifles, only gloves, goggles, and resolve. Yet in those rooms of iron and fire victory was being forged long before it was ever fought for abroad. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're listening from and the exact time you're hearing this voice. Because every record of war begins somewhere, sometimes not on a battlefield, but on a factory floor. The surviving papers that form the basis of this record were produced between 1941 and 1945, primarily within the industrial districts of Detroit, Dearborn, and Ypsilanti, Michigan. The principal author identified in the earliest documents is Margaret Louise Green, employee identification number 4428, assigned to the press assembly line at the Willow Run bomber plant, operated by the Ford Motor Company. Green's diary was written intermittently from December 1941 until August 1943, across two small stenographic notebooks distributed by the company's personnel office. The first notebook was preserved by her immediate supervisor, John W. Keeler, following Green's departure from the plant in late 1943 due to illness. Keeler submitted both notebooks to the War Manpower Commission in 1944 for review in an internal survey on industrial morale. From there, the notebooks were transferred to the National Archives and Records Administration Record Group. Records of the War Production Board, catalogued under reference code WPA-CIV 1944 MRG-02. The paper bears the watermark Eaton's Cora Sable Bond, and the handwriting is consistent throughout, legible cursive in graphite pencil, consistent with contemporaneous employment documentation. Accompanying Green's notebooks are several hundred pages of War Production Board circulars, factory bulletins, and regional production reports dating from 1941 to 1945. These were issued under the authority of the Office of Production Management, which was formally reorganized into the War Production Board on January 16, 1942 by Executive Order 9024. Each bulletin carries the standard classification stamp restricted, and most are machine-typed with carbon copies preserved on onion skin paper. The collection was digitized by the University of Michigan's Bentley Historical Library in 1978 as part of the Industrial Mobilization Project, and later integrated into the Federal Women in Industry microfilm series, roll numbers 18 through 22. Supplementary correspondence within this collection includes 9 letters addressed from Green to her older sister, Eleanor Thompson, residing in Toledo, Ohio. These letters are dated sporadically between December 1941 and March 1943, postmarked Wayne County. Each envelope bears a 2-cent defense stamp with the inscription, "Win the War." The handwriting matches that in the Willow Run diaries. The letters were first referenced in a 1951 study by the Labor History Division of Wayne State University titled Female Industrial Labor on the Home Front, 1941 to 1945. In 1962, Eleanor Thompson donated the originals to the Detroit Historical Society accession number DHS 62148. The letters remain there today, housed under controlled humidity at the Society's Fort Street repository. The remaining materials used in this reconstruction include A 1943 report by the War Manpower Commission Region 7, detailing labor substitution rates and absenteeism among female workers at Willow Run and the Packard engine plant. Personnel rosters filed under the U.S. Employment Service, listing over 42,000 women employed in the Detroit industrial region by mid-1943. Excerpts from the Ford Motor Company internal newsletter, Rouge News, published weekly, containing unsigned editorials on production quotas and workforce morale. These records were cross-verified against public microfilm copies at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, specifically Series 179.2.4, Industrial Mobilization. Civilian participation. All cited materials are considered authentic primary sources. No reconstructions, fictionalizations, or dramatizations have been included. The purpose of the Green Diaries appears from their language and format to have been private documentation rather than intended publication. The content alternates between daily observations of factory conditions and transcriptions of official notices posted on the bulletin board. In several entries, Green copied entire paragraphs from the War Production Board memoranda verbatim, including serial numbers of the directives. For example, in an entry dated February 3, 1942, she transcribed, "Effective immediately, all facilities previously engaged in civilian automobile manufacture shall devote not less than 90% of productive capacity to aircraft assembly under the supervision of the U.S. Army Air Forces Materiel Division." There is no commentary surrounding this quotation, only a date and a checkmark. It is this absence of interpretation that makes the diary valuable as a primary record. It reflects the precision and neutrality typical of internal documentation from the early wartime industrial transition. The earliest mention of female recruitment at Willow Run appears in an Office of War Information press release dated February 20, 1942, preserved in the same file. The statement reads, "Non-traditional labor categories are being filled by women previously employed in textiles, domestic service, and clerical work. Training programs established under the National Youth Administration will expand to accommodate this change." Green's own diary entry for that week includes a single-line training class begins Tuesday. New gloves issued. The materials provide a continuous chain of documentation from late 1941 to 1945, with the main gap occurring between September 1943 and May 1944. This period corresponds with Green's illness and temporary withdrawal from industrial work as indicated by a personnel file notation. Leave of absence medical 8 months. Her final entry is dated August 12, 1943, noting an inspection visit by representatives of the U.S. Army Air Forces. The diary ends abruptly after the line, "We passed the test. Production will continue through the fall." In 1957, the National Archives Accession Committee approved the declassification of all War Production Board records older than 10 years. It was during this review that the Green notebooks were rediscovered among uncatalogued boxes labeled Civilian Workforce Reports, 1942-45. The archivist's notation reads, "Condition stable. Transcribe for preservation." The transcription was completed in 1958 by archivist Eleanor B. Curtis, who prepared a carbon copy for internal circulation. That typescript now forms the basis for modern readings of the Green account. Each subsequent reproduction of these documents retains their original phrasing and orthography. Misspellings, contractions, and inconsistencies have been preserved. When partial pages or illegible fragments appear, bracketed notations are used to indicate missing text. No editorial commentary has been inserted. The only supplementary data derive from catalog metadata and accession notes. The archive references also contain a number of corroborating testimonies recorded by the Women's Bureau of the U.S. Department of Labor during the war years. Among them is a short memorandum dated June 9, 1943, summarizing interviews with female workers at the Willow Run facility. It concludes, "Morale remains satisfactory. Production objectives are met or exceeded. Female workforce integration stabilized at 43.7%. Green's diary entry of that same week reads simply, "They say we are now more women than men. We finish 2 planes a day." This alignment between official record and personal notation is characteristic of the entire corpus. Taken together, the documents illustrate the evolution of America's industrial mobilization through the language of those who experienced it from within. They record, without sentiment or speculation, the conversion of domestic labor into a disciplined wartime instrument. Today, the Green Notebook's letters and associated reports reside in the combined holdings of the National Archives, the Detroit Historical Society, and the Bentley Historical Library. Digital surrogates are accessible under the Women in Industry Collection archival identifier or Series D microfilm rolls 18 to 22. Permission for citation and reproduction was granted under the public domain Mark 1.0. The archival compilation was last reviewed and verified in 2019 by the U.S. National Archives Preservation Division. All texts referenced herein derive from those primary holdings. No interpretive reconstructions have been introduced. Each line reflects the factual documentary tone of the original writers. The materials together constitute a single continuous record, an unembellished testimony of industrial labor during wartime America, preserved exactly as it was written and reintroduced here for historical continuity rather than dramatization. The earliest surviving pages of Margaret L. Green's diary begin on December 8, 1941, the morning following the attack on Pearl Harbor. The notebook itself is standard stenographic size 6 by 9 inches bound in black cardboard, its pages numbered by hand in graphite. The first 3 sheets contain daily tallies of machine output quantities of aluminum pressings, stamp loads per hour, and a list of tool numbers. Below these technical notations appears the first continuous paragraph of narrative text written in a steady, compact script. December 8th. The foreman says the night shift will stay. We are to keep the belts moving. I have never heard the factory so loud. The radio plays the president's speech again. Nobody talks. We wait for orders from the office. No commentary follows. Green's habit maintained throughout the first month of the notebook is to begin each day's entry with a date, the temperature, and a brief record of production changes. Only occasionally does she include human reference, and even then sparingly. The entry for December 10th reads, 2 new girls arrived from the sewing division. They work at the small press beside mine. They do well. The oil pump sticks. A later notation adds in parentheses, repaired by Keeler, 3 p.m. These parenthetical remarks are frequent. They correspond to mechanical incidents noted in the plant's maintenance logs. The pattern suggests that Green used the diary as both personal memorandum and technical ledger. By December 13th, her tone begins to reflect the accelerating pace of conversion. New order from Washington. Civilian models suspended. All tools to be retuned for military pattern. We remove the dies ourselves. No men left in this section. I worked from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. without pause. The next page bears a line drawn across the middle, separating the work report from a short observation. No lunch today. We had sandwiches at the press. The air smells like burnt paint. Each sentence stands isolated, factual, unelaborated. Even when fatigue or unease appear, they are rendered in neutral description. On December 18th, she writes, the windows are covered now. The Army says no light must show at night. It is difficult to breathe near the furnaces. We use the same masks the welders had. This note coincides with a regional blackout order issued to Detroit factories that week. The correspondence between the diary and official directives confirms the chronological accuracy of the entries. Throughout January 1942, the entries lengthen, and the handwriting grows heavier, perhaps reflecting both strain and habit. Green documents the introduction of new female recruits to her line, many transferred from the former upholstery and finishing departments. January 7th, 4 more women joined today. They are from the trim shop. The instructor showed us how to read the gauge marks. We finish 40 casings each hour. The quota is 60. January 10th. Noise increased with the new presses. The floor vibrates underfoot. We wear cotton in our ears. No one complains. January 12th. The lunch whistle did not sound. We kept working. They say we are behind schedule. Her syntax is consistent subject-verb, direct object. The diary records no adjectives beyond technical necessity. Where emotion might be expected, there is numerical substitution. She measures fatigue in shifts, not in hours, and describes progress through tonnage and output counts. By mid-January, the factory's transition to full military production was complete. Green's entries from this period coincide with the first official War Production Board bulletins distributed to the Ford plants. She copies fragments directly into her diary without attribution. Directive number 1, all available capacity to aircraft assembly. Priority AA1 effective immediately. Directive number 4, no sale of new passenger automobiles until further notice. These insertions occupy entire pages, written carefully in block capitals. There is no sign that she distinguished between her own writing and the copied text. Both are integrated into a single chronological record. On February 1st, Green notes a shift in personnel arrangement. All supervisors replaced by Army inspectors. We sign our names at end of each unit. If error found, pay is docked. I work now beside an older woman, Mrs. Henderson. She brings a thermos of coffee. We share it at the bench. Even this moment of human connection is presented without commentary beyond the act itself. The neutrality remains absolute. The February pages also reveal growing standardization of language. Entries begin to include headings such as Operation Sequence and Defect Report. The diary's content merges seamlessly with factory documentation, turning the personal notebook into a mirror of institutional procedure. February 10th, Operation 12A, Fuselage Plate B24 Series, 2 rejects for thickness, reason worn die, correction replace shim. February 15th, defect rate reduced to 0.2%. Inspector satisfied. New schedule posted 12-hour shifts. The absence of reflection in these records has led historians to treat the Green notebooks not as subjective testimony, but as a micro-archive of wartime industrial routine. Still, certain sentences indicate awareness of broader events noted with the same restraint. After Roosevelt's speech announcing the creation of the War Production Board, she wrote, February 20th, the President spoke of planes and tanks. We heard it on the line. No one stopped the presses. Green's references to weather, light, and sound provide additional verification. On March 3rd, she mentions a power outage lasting 40 minutes, which is corroborated by an electrical failure report from the Detroit Edison Company on the same date. Her record reads, Power cut, 3:40 p.m. Presses stopped mid-cycle. No damage. Restarted 4:25. Lost output, 18 units. Another entry documents an accident in the riveting section. March 12th. Sparks from welder set cotton rags on fire. No injury. Hose used. Supervisor commended quick action. The terse notation style suggests a workforce accustomed to precision and surveillance. Each incident is recorded with forensic clarity, absent of emotion, serving as both evidence and routine log. Green's final entries for the first quarter of 1942 continue this structure. A sequence from March 24 to 30 details production statistics alongside minimal personal data. March 24th. Target reached 300 assemblies. All presses operational. March 25th, temperature high. Ventilation poor. March 26th, 2 inspectors visited from Washington. They wore armbands marked AAF. March 28th. New schedule night shift to begin, 10 p.m. March 30th. I am assigned to train a replacement. Her name is Ruth. No conclusion follows. The line ends without punctuation. The page after is blank except for a faint grease fingerprint. That mark remains visible in the archival copy reproduced in the National Archives microfilm roll WB2418. From these first months of entries, December 1941 through March 1942, the pattern of Margaret Green's documentation is established. It is methodical, factual, and stripped of sentiment. Her words form the earliest direct witness account of America's industrial mobilization, written from the inside of the process itself. Each notation corroborates official records and reveals the texture of work without commentary or embellishment. In its precision and silence alike, the diary provides the purest early record of the women who forged victory not through declaration, but through repetition, the sound of machines continuing line after line, shift after shift. Between April and August of 1942, the paper trail around Willow Run begins to diverge in tone and content. The same days, the same machines, and the same workforce appear in multiple surviving documents that do not agree entirely. When read together, they reveal how the experience of industrial war could be recorded in parallel registers, each true within its frame, none fully reconcilable with the others. Margaret Green's diary of April 2, 1942, records the inspection that followed the first quarter of conversion. The men from Washington arrived at noon. They carried blueprints in tubes and wore arm badges marked Army Air Forces inspection. They said production must double. We do not have enough presses. The line stopped twice for lack of bolts. We stayed until midnight. The corresponding War Production Board District Inspection Report, number 77 from the same date, describes the visit in markedly different language. Inspection at Willow Run, conducted under authority of the Aircraft Production Division. Plant operating at acceptable capacity. No delays noted in primary assembly lines. Personnel cooperation satisfactory. Output on schedule. A third document, an internal memorandum from Superintendent J.W. Keeler, dated the next day, adds another angle. Shortage of fastening bolts. Type B9 caused intermittent stoppages on presses 14 and 15. Substitution authorized pending resupply. Production quota maintained only by extending second shift through 2400 hours. Read consecutively, the three accounts do not cancel one another. They outline a system in which truth was segmented by administrative purpose. The inspector's report sought compliance. The superintendent's note sought remedy, and Green's entry recorded endurance. By mid-May, heat inside the plant became a recurring topic. Green's entry for May 14th states, one worker collapsed on the floor. It was too hot near the furnace. We continued. They moved her to the bench outside. She came back after an hour. The Public Health Service Industrial Hygiene Division report, filed the next day, offers another picture. Temperature readings within Furnace Bay averaged 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Ventilation adequate. No cases of heat prostration observed. General conditions satisfactory. And yet the factory's safety log number 8 preserves a single line for that same date. Minor fainting episode. Female worker recovered without treatment. The differences lie in what each voice considered significant. Green named the act of continuation. The inspector measured temperature. The safety officer reduced the event to a statistic. The documents coexist like layers of transparency, each overlaying the same hour with a distinct intention. June brings the first full night shift rotation. Green writes on June 3rd, "The new shift begins at 10 p.m. Most of us have never worked nights before. It is hard to see the gauges under artificial light. The lamps flicker when the power drops." The Willow Run Weekly Bulletin number 12, printed that week, reads instead, "Night shift instituted successfully. Lighting installations upgraded to industrial standard. Output levels equal to day shift within 48 hours." And a maintenance memorandum from Safety Inspector R.C. Albright, dated June 5th, confirms part of Green's account. Electrical current irregular in Sector D, Press Row 2. Flickering reported by operators. Maintenance instructed to replace 3 lamp units. Each source captures the same phenomenon, but through a different aperture: human perception, corporate communication, and technical correction. Discrepancies also appear in portrayals of morale. In a letter to her sister on May 28th, Green notes, "I think we will manage, though the hours grow longer. They say we are doing well. Sometimes I wish for quiet." Less than 2 weeks later, the Office of War Information press release number 214 presents a collective image of the same workforce. Women war workers report high morale and sense of patriotic purpose. Many volunteer for additional hours. Spirits remain strong despite long schedules. The press release omits fatigue entirely, yet the timing of Green's letter situates the two statements in direct opposition. Each is true in the context it serves: the private note, written to a relative, and the public bulletin, written to sustain national confidence. Even numerical data divides along similar lines. The War Production Board second quarter summary lists Willow Run's efficiency at 102% of target output. Superintendent Keeler's internal memorandum dated July 1st reports instead total assemblies completed 1,478 units versus target 1,600. Deficit attributed to material shortage and training delays. The statistical disagreement arises from differing definitions of completion, yet it illustrates how administrative language could turn deficiency into achievement. Another witness, Ruth Henderson, appears in the record through a 1946 interview conducted by the Women's Bureau. "We worked side by side on the presses. It was not easy, but there was pride. The inspectors came often. We had to redo parts sometimes, but mostly things ran fine. I don't recall the machines stopping the way some others said." Her recollection contrasts sharply with Green's frequent mentions of stoppages. Memory shaped by distance and post-war interpretation softens the disruptions still visible in the 1942 documents. Meanwhile, a letter from Colonel James E. Hollister, liaison for the War Production Board, dated June 22, 1942, acknowledges internal debate. Reports from Willow Run exaggerated regarding interruptions. Output remains within acceptable limits. Public commentary to be discouraged. Emphasize progress in all communications. The directive does not dispute the existence of problems. It merely governs their description. Green's unadorned notes therefore preserve what official correspondence sought to neutralize. Mechanical evidence mirrors the textual divide. Photographic inspection sheets from Series WPA PH441 include the caption, "Alignment complete. No deviation noted. Equipment functioning as designed." Green's entry for July 5th quietly contradicts it. New jig misaligned by a fraction. We file the edges to fit. Supervisor says not to record the change. The factory's perfection in print depended upon corrections unrecorded in form. Even wages appear differently, depending on where one looks. The U.S. Employment Service Quarterly Wage Summary for the third quarter of 1942 lists average female pay at 72 cents per hour parity with men. Green's entry of July 14th observes simply, "Pay envelope lighter than promised." They say rate corrected next week. Payroll archives confirm that adjustments took effect a month later. Within the small lag between those lines sits the practical meaning of equality as lived rather than declared. By August, the paper trail narrows again toward consensus, but not before leaving a residue of overlapping truths. The Army Air Force's Materiel Division Bulletin, 16-42, concludes, "Production behind schedule by approximately 10%. Additional personnel requested." Green's final summer note for August 12th ends without comment. They said the planes will fly sooner than expected. Together, these fragments chart the boundaries of accuracy. Each document tells part of the story: the inspector's confidence, the supervisor's caution, the worker's endurance, the official's reassurance. None erases the others. Their friction is the record itself, a field of small contradictions that, when read continuously, describe the complex texture of industrial war more faithfully than any single version could. Between March and June of 1942, several parallel records were produced that describe the same period of conversion at the Willow Run plant. These documents, though covering identical operations, diverge in tone, emphasis, and interpretation. Together, they provide the first instance of discrepancy within the archival sequence, a moment when official record, personal observation, and managerial correspondence cease to align precisely. The first comes from Margaret L. Green's diary, already cited in earlier sections. Her entry for April 2, 1942, reads in full, "The men from Washington arrived at noon. They carried blueprints in tubes and wore arm badges marked Army Air Forces Inspection. They said production must double. We do not have enough presses." The line stopped twice for lack of bolts. We stayed until midnight. On the same date, the War Production Board District Inspection Report number 77 records a different impression of the visit. April 2, 1942. Inspection at Willow Run, conducted under authority of the Aircraft Production Division. Plant operating at acceptable capacity. No delays noted in primary assembly lines. Personnel cooperation satisfactory. Output on schedule. The contrast is clear. Green's account indicates mechanical shortage and overtime. The official report asserts that production was uninterrupted. No cross-reference in later files reconciles the two descriptions. A third source, an internal memorandum by Plant Superintendent J.W. Keeler, dated April 3, 1942, one day after the inspection, supports Green's version indirectly. Shortage of fastening bolts. Type B9 caused intermittent stoppages on presses 14 and 15. Substitution authorized pending resupply. Production quota maintained only by extending second shift through 2,400 hours. Each statement occupies its own register of fact. The inspector reports efficiency. The superintendent documents deficiency. The worker records exhaustion. None is inaccurate yet. Each measures reality through a separate metric: compliance, logistics, endurance. The following month introduces another point of divergence. Green's diary for May 14, 1942, contains this notation. One worker collapsed on the floor. It was too hot near the furnace. We continued. They moved her to the bench outside. She came back after an hour. No other personal commentary follows. The same incident appears in a report from the U.S. Public Health Service Industrial Hygiene Division filed May 15, 1942, after a routine inspection. Temperature readings within Furnace Bay averaged 94 to go. Ventilation adequate. No cases of heat prostration observed. General conditions satisfactory. Yet the plant's own safety log number 8, preserved separately, contains a single line dated May 14th. Minor fainting episode. Female worker recovered without treatment. The differences are not contradictions, but variations of emphasis. What Green described as an interruption became, in official context, a non-event. The flattening of experience into report language, no cases observed, illustrates how administrative phrasing could erase the immediacy found in private records. A more direct inconsistency occurs in June concerning the implementation of the first full night shift rotation. Green's diary, June 3, 1942. The new shift begins at 10 p.m. Most of us have never worked nights before. It is hard to see the gauges under artificial light. The lamps flicker when the power drops. However, Willow Run Weekly Bulletin number 12 issued the same week reports. Night shift instituted successfully. Lighting installations upgraded to industrial standard. Output levels equal to day shift within 48 hours. A further memorandum from Regional Safety Inspector R.C. Albright, dated June 5th, complicates the picture. Electrical current irregular in Sector D, Press Row 2. Flickering reported by operators. Maintenance instructed to replace 3 lamp units. Taken together, these documents depict a plant both functioning and faltering, officially efficient, mechanically unstable, and humanly strained. The coexistence of these truths forms the structure of wartime industry itself. Another form of contradiction emerges in the portrayal of morale. Green's letters to her sister, written between May and June 1942, express mild uncertainty about endurance. I think we will manage, though the hours grow longer. They say we are doing well. Sometimes I wish for quiet. By contrast, the Office of War Information Press Release number 214, published June 10, 1942, includes a feature paragraph drawn from interviews at Willow Run. Women war workers report high morale and sense of patriotic purpose. Many volunteer for additional hours. Spirits remain strong despite long schedules. The release cites no names, and it is unclear whether Green or her colleagues were among those interviewed. Yet her brief phrase, "I wish for quiet," reveals another dimension omitted from propaganda narratives. Further discrepancies appear in the statistical data. The War Production Board summary table for the second quarter of 1942 lists Willow Run's efficiency rating as 102% of target output. However, the plant superintendent's internal memorandum from July 1st notes, total assemblies completed 1,478 units versus target 1,600. Deficit attributed to material shortage and training delays. The mathematical conflict results from differing calculation bases. The federal summary includes partially completed units as progress, whereas the local report counts only finished assemblies. Nonetheless, the divergence illustrates how numerical representation could shift meaning from deficiency to success through definitional adjustment alone. Even among personal accounts, variations persist. A second worker, Ruth Henderson, whose name appears in Green's March 30th entry, left behind a brief oral testimony recorded in 1946 by the Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor. Transcribed excerpt. We worked side by side on the presses. It was not easy, but there was pride. The inspectors came often. We had to redo parts sometimes, but mostly things ran fine. I don't recall the machine stopping the way some others said. This recollection, made 4 years after the events, contradicts Green's repeated references to stoppages and shortages. Henderson's memory may have been shaped by post-war optimism or imperfect recollection. Nevertheless, the record stands 2 participants, same station, same year, differing memory of frequency and disruption. A further archival fragment adds complexity. A letter from Colonel James E. Hollister, War Production Board, liaison to Ford, dated June 22, 1942, addressed to regional administrators. Reports from Willow Run exaggerated regarding interruptions. Output remains within acceptable limits. Public commentary to be discouraged. Emphasize progress in all communications. This directive, though bureaucratic in tone, confirms the existence of negative reports being managed through controlled messaging. Green's private notes therefore capture details intentionally minimized in official circulation. Later in July 1942, a set of photographic inspection sheets, series WPA-PH441, document mechanical alignment of the bomber fuselage jigs. The accompanying captions written by engineering staff state, alignment complete, no deviation noted, equipment functioning as designed. Yet Green's diary for July 5th offers a concise but contradictory entry. New jig misaligned by a fraction. We file the edges to fit. Supervisor says not to record the change. No further elaboration follows. The page ends with routine numbers. The difference between no deviation noted and file the edges to fit encapsulates the entire tension between lived adjustment and declared perfection. An additional cross-source discrepancy arises from the pay records preserved by the U.S. Employment Service. The service's quarterly wage summary, Region 7, 3rd quarter, 1942, lists average female operator pay at 0.772 per hour, equal to male counterparts for equivalent tasks. Green's entry of July 14, 1942 contradicts this. Pay envelope lighter than promised. They say rate corrected next week. Payroll documentation for her section, located in the Ford Industrial Archives, confirms that the formal wage adjustment occurred in August, 1 month later. Thus, both statements are accurate within their temporal frame but conflicting when read without context. By late summer, the documentary evidence begins to converge again, but the intervening months remain characterized by overlapping truths, each precise, none complete. The archival contrast between diary report and directive forms a mosaic rather than a single narrative line. Green's measured phrases, "We continued," "We stayed until midnight," "The belts will not stop," coexist with bureaucratic affirmations of stability. The historian reading these pages encounters not contradiction as error, but contradiction as evidence the multiplicity inherent in any organized effort recorded by unequal voices. The record ends its second phase on August 12, 1942, when Green notes an inspection visit by the Army Air Force's representatives. Her final line of that summer states, "They said the planes will fly sooner than expected." The same day's official memorandum filed under AAF Material Division Bulletin 16-42 concludes, "Production behind schedule by approximately 10%. Additional personnel requested." Thus, even the closing entries of this period retain the pattern of discrepancy between expectation and report optimism and arithmetic. These conflicting records, preserved without reconciliation, form the central spine of the archival narrative. The simultaneous existence of order and strain within the same historical frame, each validated by documentation, each incomplete without the other. By the late summer of 1942, the tone of the surviving records begins to change. The documents from Willow Run no longer describe transition or confusion, they describe endurance. The tempo of work had stabilized, and the language of both diaries and official memoranda became procedural, almost mathematical. Everything was measured, weighed, tallied, and timed. In one of her later entries dated August 21, 1942, Margaret Green noted simply that 2 planes were completed today. Final assembly delayed by missing rivets. The sentence is dry functional and followed by another. The Army men came at 4. They inspected each section, no comments. They signed the forms and left. Her precision matched the institutional tone of the War Production Board's own inspection summary for that same week, which recorded that Willow Run had achieved completion of 2 aircraft units per schedule, with minor irregularities in fuselage panel fastening and overtime averaging 14.6 hours per employee. The language of personal and bureaucratic record had become almost identical, both stripped of judgment, concerned only with verification. Green's next pages move further into the technical. The words oil pressure and gauge appear more often than tired or cold. She wrote that aluminum sheets arrived from Cleveland lighter gauge than before, difficult to handle. Edges curl. She added supervisor says Army approved change to save weight. Sparks from welder burn holes easily. The line sits halfway between observation and engineering note, written by someone whose daily life had become indistinguishable from process control. That same week, a bulletin from the Ford Engineering Department recorded that operators demonstrated improved familiarity with measurement standards, and recommended that magnifying glasses be issued to female personnel for fine-gauge readings. Both accounts describe the same adjustment, one through the language of workers' hands, the other through policy. Through September, her writing narrows further into data. Rivet 332 replaced by Yang 18 standard, she wrote. Drill heads dull quickly. We sharpen twice per shift. Output 180 units. 3 lines later. 2 rejections for surface warp. Corrected and passed. Nothing else. The diary reads like a production log. When the cold returned, Green noted how frost formed on the inside windows and how the paint drums were warmed with lamps. The regional maintenance memorandum for that same day confirmed the same observation, though, in the colder prose of administration, cold weather affecting paint viscosity. Maintain storage at 65 degrees Celsius minimum. In the distance between her sentence and the official one lies the exact distinction between experience and oversight, 2 languages describing the same act of keeping the paint warm enough to dry. By November, her tone had settled into habit. The diary from that month contains only a few phrases, night shift only. More women now. 1 plane every 6 hours. In those sparse sentences, the vast machinery of industrial mobilization compresses into routine. The War Production Board's November summary echoes it with its own reduction. Average production rate 3.9 aircraft per day. Female participation 45.1%. Turnover minimal. Both lines point to the same fact stability, but in neither do we find triumph. The record on all sides had become quiet. Winter brought efficiency. Reports from the Army Air Force's Materiel divisions described conversion complete and production line stable. Green's entry for January 13, 1943 simply reads, Inspector absent today. We checked our own work. No rejects. What the report called reduced inspection frequency became, in her handwriting, a practical reality workers now trusted to inspect themselves. February introduced one of the few environmental setbacks recorded in the entire corpus. A letter from Superintendent Keeler to the War Manpower Commission described transportation difficulties for workers from the Ypsilanti district and requested gasoline rations for the buses. On the same day, Green wrote few arrived on time. Buses late because of snow. We waited in the break room. They say production lost, but we will catch up. 2 perspectives, managerial and personal, running in parallel, perfectly aligned in date and detail, though different in scale. March's pages belong to acceleration. Green noted that 3 planes today, 1 engine delayed. Army wants faster. We cannot go faster. The official circular for that same week reported that output exceeds forecast. Morale satisfactory. Both are accurate and both are incomplete. One measures exhaustion, the other achievement. By early spring, Green's handwriting begins to share the vocabulary of the engineers whose memos filled the archives. The Willow Run engineering logbook records that Press 11B recalibrated. Pressure increased to 100 psi. Output improved by 6%. Operator M. Green. Her own entry that day mirrors it exactly in miniature. Press 11B fixed. Feeds smoother now. The same event viewed once from the top of the plant and once from the floor. In May, as the proportion of women workers reached nearly half the language of novelty disappears altogether. Green wrote, no men on this line now. We run the presses alone. The supervisor says we do well. The Department of Labor Bulletin for that same month summarized female labor integration sustained at 48.2%. Productivity equivalent to pre-war male benchmarks. The diary's understated tone and the report's bureaucratic precision meet at the same point of normalization. The extraordinary had become ordinary. June's documentation shows that work had become relentless but steady. Green noted, Inspection 58 passed without remark. No rework. The War Manpower Commission, in its weekly report, echoed, voluntary Sunday labor continues. No absenteeism recorded. Neither sentence celebrates success. Both merely confirm continuity. By July, outside observers had begun to record what the workers themselves no longer described. A memorandum from Lieutenant E. M. Harding of the Army Air Forces recorded that female personnel demonstrate high proficiency in mechanical operation. Recommend continuation post-war. Green writing in the same week mentioned only men with clipboards watched us work. They said nothing. That silence between the official acknowledgement and her brief sentence is the sound of how recognition registered on the factory floor, noticed but wordless. Her last entry, August 12, 1943, repeats the rhythm of dozens before it. Army inspection again. We passed. Production will continue through the fall. The inspection report filed that day reads, all observed units conforming to specification. Morale satisfactory. Recommend increased quota. The symmetry is exact even in tone. Each voice had by then learned the other's cadence. After that date, the notebooks fall silent. The remaining pages are blank apart from smudged fingerprints and faint grease stains that have darkened with age. Subsequent production reports continue for months, still recording the same metrics, attendance, tonnage hours, and percentages, but the personal handwriting that animated the earlier records disappears entirely. Taken together, these mid-war documents show not climax, but absorption. The diaries, the memos, and the inspection sheets converge into a single mode of language, functional, precise, and impersonal. Even emotion, when it surfaces, takes the shape of a number or a rate. The deeper the archive extends into 1943, the less distinction remains between personal and institutional voice. Greene's words, the engineer's reports, and the Army's memoranda all begin to speak in the same register. In that sameness lies the final measure of industrial total war. Every page stamped, typed, or penciled documents the same result, that the lines kept moving, the planes were completed, and the women who forged victory did so within the exact parameters of procedure. No adjectives, no interpretation, only completion. By the time the last line was written, the story had ceased to belong to any one person. It had become part of the mechanism itself, the record of work sealed inside its own precision, continuing until the war's end. The final surviving page of the Greene notebooks bears a faint graphite indentation where the pencil pressed too hard and tore slightly through the paper. The date at the top is written clearly, August 12, 1943. Below it, the line moves evenly across the ruled surface, the same hand that filled hundreds of pages before, but slower now, deliberate, as if tracing a practiced shape. Army inspection again. We passed. Production will continue through the fall. The sentence ends with a period and no signature. Beneath it, a thin horizontal mark, perhaps intended as a divider, perhaps just the motion of the hand setting the pencil down. There are no further words. On the next page, the ruling lines remain blank, the fibers of the paper carrying only a gray residue from the facing sheet. The diary ends not with reflection or farewell, but with the mechanical completion of a routine entry. The tone is identical to every report she ever wrote, factual, contained, precise. The same day, a typed memorandum from the Army Air Force's Inspection Division confirms the event in the language of procedure, all observed units conforming to specification. Morale satisfactory. Recommend increased quota. It is the last known document in which Greene's work is mentioned. There is no further correspondence about her position, no exit form, no notation of resignation or dismissal. In the personnel ledger of the Willow Run plant, her name is followed by a dash and the word inactive. No reason is given. Subsequent inspection logs continue without her. The September sheets list new supervisors, new shift leads, new defect ratios. Yet her handwriting, once constant in the daily record, disappears entirely after that final line. The absence is neither explained nor acknowledged. It simply occurs. An archival note filed 10 years later by Eleanor B. Curtis, the National Archives transcriber, who copied the diaries in 1958, observes the same silence. Her remark typed in the lower margin of the transcript reads, "No continuation found beyond entry of 8/12/43. Notebook otherwise complete." The simplicity of the statement conveys more than it intends. The material record ends precisely where the human one does, with a page still available but unused. Among the administrative correspondence of that period lies one unrelated document, a War Production Board summary of August output, which states that Willow Run's production rate had increased by 12% compared to the previous month. The same paper includes a brief mention that labor stability remains high, replacement minimal. It is impossible to determine whether Greene's absence was one of the few exceptions hidden behind that generalization. In later decades, archivists traced several of her colleagues for oral history projects. None recalled the exact date of her departure. One remembered that she stopped coming around that summer, another that her hands gave out from the presswork. The evidence is anecdotal, unverifiable, peripheral. The official documentation neither confirms nor denies it. For the historical record, she ceases to exist as of that August day. On the facing side of the same final page, faint pencil marks suggest a partial start of a line, the curve of an S, then nothing. The mark may be accidental, a transfer from another sheet, or the beginning of a word left unfinished. It carries no context, no continuation, only the trace of motion that failed to become text. When enlarged in the microfilm image, the graphite grain appears like static. Other materials from the plant continue for another 2 years, inspection reports, production charts, correspondence about quotas and shifts, but they speak in collective terms, labor force female operators' average output. The individual voice that once recorded each day in pencil is gone, absorbed back into the administrative rhythm. The National Archives Accession Committee report of 1957, which inventoried the boxes where Green's notebooks were found, ends its summary with a note on condition, paper stable, binding intact. Last entry dated 8/12/43. Subsequent sheets unused. It is an archivist's language neutral, but in its neutrality lies the weight of what remains unsaid. The record is not concluded. It is simply unfinished. Every other document in the file system continues to measure productivity as though the human element within it were constant. The September inspection sheets, for instance, list the same total of operating presses, the same targets, and the same closing phrase, output satisfactory. The machinery, as always, continues. Only the handwriting stops. In the larger frame of national record-keeping, the last mention of Willow Run's female press operators appears in a War Department statistical abstract published in 1945. It reads, "At peak mobilization, 1943 female labor in aircraft production exceeded 300,000. Average efficiency, 98.4% of male benchmark. The number replaces every name. Within that number, Green's existence is included and erased at once. When the archival microfilm was produced in the late 1970s, technicians recorded the final sheet of the Green notebooks with a leader frame labeled End of Reel. The camera captured the empty ruled lines, the faint indentation of the graphite, and the margin where her pencil tore the paper. That image has since become the last visible artifact of her record, a frame of silence. No summary or reflection accompanies it. The transcriber's closing note merely states no further material located. The file number follows, then a period. It is this small punctuation repeated across thousands of archival descriptions that concludes the story, not an ending written by the participant, but an ending defined by the limits of what survived. Later publications on wartime industry would cite her diary as one of the few direct civilian testimonies from within an aircraft plant. They quote her early lines. The radio keeps repeating the president's address and her middle ones. "We cannot go faster." But almost none reproduce the last sentence, perhaps because it lacks drama. Production will continue through the fall. Yet in its flat certainty lies the complete articulation of the war's internal logic. The phrase contains both continuation and conclusion. The work will go on, but her writing will not. When the pages are turned in the microfilm reader, the light passes through the blank sheet, revealing the watermark Eaton's coercible bond, faintly embedded in the fibers. Nothing interrupts the white space. The reel ends, the motor stops, and the frame holds still. No further documentation exists. This is the moment where the archival narrative reaches its climax, not through revelation, but through cessation. The precision of every prior entry leads to a void that no report can fill. The machines kept turning. The records kept filing. Yet the human instrument of this documentation set her pencil down and did not lift it again. In the logic of the archive, silence has its own notation. The absence of text becomes a final entry. The diary, the reports, the memoranda, all converge here in the space after a period in the blank of an unused page. The work continues through the fall, but the voice that once measured it has stopped. No explanation is necessary. The history ends precisely where the record does. The rest is the hum of the factory, distant, unrecorded, carrying on beyond the reach of the pencil that once followed its rhythm. The last surviving evidence of Margaret Green's existence as an author is a line about continuation that itself does not continue. The archive closes there, not because the story concludes, but because the paper ran out, and with it the trace of the hand that wrote. The surviving notebooks of Margaret Louise Greene were rediscovered in 1957, more than a decade after the Willow Run factory closed its wartime assembly lines. They were found in a sealed storage box labeled Civilian Workforce Reports, 1942-45, within the National Archives Record Group 179, a collection dedicated to the administrative remnants of the War Production Board. The box had been moved several times from Detroit to Chicago, and later to a federal warehouse in St. Louis, before reaching the archive's new facility in Washington. The discovery was made by Eleanor B. Curtis, a junior archivist then assigned to catalog uncoded accessions from the industrial mobilization period. Her inventory sheet lists the contents in a single sentence: 2 stenographic notebooks, graphite handwriting, a presumed personal record of female press operator Willow Run assembly plant. The date of cataloging, June 17, 1957, marks the moment the diaries re-entered the public record after 14 years of silence. Curtis's task was clerical rather than interpretive. She transcribed the text on a typewriter using onion skin paper, preserving every line break and misspelling. Her carbon copies, together with microfilm reels produced later by the National Archives Preservation Division, became the basis for all subsequent references to Greene's writings. Curtis appended a brief comment to the final page of the transcript: end of text. No continuation located. Material fragile, but stable. In the logic of the archive, such a phrase is not commentary, but certification proof that the document's ending is authentic, however incomplete. For years, the notebooks remained little known outside specialist circles. They were cited occasionally in technical studies of wartime labor, once in a 1962 Detroit Historical Society bulletin, and again in a 1978 University of Michigan project titled Women in Industry Primary Sources on the American Home Front. In both cases, Greene's writings were used not as personal testimony, but as quantitative data, an illustration of production, tempo, shift, duration, or workforce proportion. Her name appeared in footnotes abbreviated as M.L. Greene Diary Willow Run, NARA RG 179. No publication treated the diaries as a narrative. During the digitization drive of the late 1970s, microfilm operators in College Park, Maryland, created high-contrast reproductions of the notebooks. Each frame was numbered sequentially. The last frame captured the empty ruled page following the final entry. The leader strip attached to the reel reads, "End of reel, no further material." In this way, the absence became part of the record, not a loss, but a documented boundary. Researchers who later examined the originals noted small physical details, the indentation of a pencil stroke, where pressure had cut through the paper, the uneven wear of the cardboard cover, the faint chemical odor of graphite and oil. On the inside of the front cover in the upper right corner is a stamp from the War Manpower Commission, partially faded, and beneath it the handwritten number 4428, Greene's employee identification. The materiality of the notebooks situates them precisely within the industrial environment they describe. The letters to her sister, discovered earlier in 1962 and housed separately at the Detroit Historical Society, were eventually cross-referenced with the notebooks. The handwriting matches the vocabulary aligns, and several phrases appear in both sources. Yet the letters, unlike the diaries, contain traces of voice greetings, dates, and postal signatures, while the notebooks remain anonymous, stripped of all address or sentiment. Together they frame a single author who wrote in 2 registers, one personal, one procedural. In 1991, the National Archives included excerpts from Greene's notes in an exhibition titled Voices of the Home Front. Her words appeared on a backlit display next to factory photographs: no uniforms, no rifles, only gloves and goggles. But we knew this was our front line. Visitors often assumed the line came from a speech or propaganda poster. Few realized it had been written in pencil by a worker who never published a word. Beyond the institutional rediscovery of the notebooks, little is known about Greene's life after 1943. Employment rosters suggest she did not return to the plant after her recorded absence. Census data from 1950 lists a Margaret L. Greene of similar age residing in Toledo, Ohio, employed as a bookkeeper. The identification is plausible but unconfirmed. No surviving family records have been verified, and no obituary bearing her full name appears in regional archives between 1943 and 1970. In the decades since, the notebooks have taken on an unintended significance. Historians of industrial labor cite them not for what they reveal explicitly, but for what they do not: the texture of silence embedded in bureaucratic systems, the absence of commentary, the brevity of her entries, and the precision of her language all reflect the absorption of individual consciousness into collective procedure. Her writing is neither confession nor protest. It is measurement repeated daily until it stops. The physical preservation of the notebooks remains stable. They are stored today in a climate-controlled vault at the National Archives facility in College Park. Container identification: Box 3118B, Shelf 27, under the title Personal Diary, Civilian War Worker, Willow Run, 1941-43. The paper is brittle at the edges, but legible. Digital surrogates were produced in 2015 in TIFF format for the National Digital Catalog, ensuring continued accessibility. The Detroit Historical Society retains the companion letters. The University of Michigan holds the cross-indexed microfilm copy. Yet several questions remain unresolved. Why the diary ended so abruptly, whether by circumstance, fatigue, illness, or departure, is not known. No record of dismissal, transfer, or death corresponds to her name in the surviving administrative files. The archival silence may be a gap in documentation or an ordinary erasure within mass employment statistics. In either case, it represents the point at which private authorship dissolved entirely into institutional anonymity. Modern readings of the Green Record often focus on its tone. The neutrality once regarded as impersonal is now seen as its defining characteristic. Scholars of documentary history describe her style as procedural consciousness, a form of writing that mirrors the mechanization of labor itself. Her voice, detached yet exact, reflects a world where observation became indistinguishable from production. What she captured without intending to was the grammar of total mobilization, a language in which human experience was recorded as data calibrated to the rhythm of the machines. From the historian's perspective, the Green Notebooks occupy a narrow but significant space between bureaucracy and memory. They confirm the existence of a generation of women whose labor built the physical instruments of modern warfare, but left few words of their own. Her pages, preserved without commentary, become an artifact of that broader silence. They show not what was felt, but what was done, and by extension, how the doing itself became history. In the archives, the notebooks are stored flat, encased in acid-free folders, each page separated by a sheet of translucent tissue. The pencil marks still gleam faintly under angled light. When researchers view them, the experience is sensory as much as intellectual: the rustle of thin paper, the faint residue of graphite, the alignment of human handwriting with administrative type. The record endures as object before it is read as text. The surviving trace of Margaret Louise Green is therefore both complete and incomplete, a closed record that nonetheless gestures beyond its own ending. The story it tells is not of triumph or tragedy, but of continuity, the continuation of work, of documentation, of the ordinary discipline that sustains vast systems. Her final line, "Production will continue through the fall," encapsulates that continuity perfectly. It marks the point where language reaches its limit and history takes over. Today, the notebooks remain open to consultation for researchers studying the home front labor force of World War II. They occupy less than half an inch of shelf space, yet their content bridges the distance between individual routine and national mobilization. Each word written in pencil persists as both testimony and mechanism, the measured heartbeat of an industrial empire in motion. Nothing further has been added to the file since 2019. The archivist's notation at the end of the catalog entry reads simply "Condition verified, no updates." It is a bureaucratic phrase, yet it carries the same cadence as Green's own writing: precise, economical, and final. In the end, the Green Notebooks remind us that the most enduring voices in the historical record are often the quietest. They speak without emphasis, without embellishment, and yet their persistence transforms absence into evidence. What remains of her story is not emotion, but trace graphite on paper, the exact temperature of fact. And so this record closes, as it began, with the sound of work continuing somewhere beyond the frame. The machines have long since stopped. The factory stands empty. But the words endure silent and exact, their meaning carried forward by those who read them. What if every ledger, every small diary in an archive carries within it the same unspoken history of hands that labored, recorded, and fell quiet next? We will listen to another record. Another voice preserved in the folds of paper waiting for its turn to be read.